Okay, thanks. Good morning, colleagues. I have to say it's truly inspiring for me to see so many people here preparing to spend a day reflecting on attachment-informed practice, because as many of you know, it's a subject very close to my own heart. So it really does gladden the heart of a psychologist, albeit that it's tinged with a little bit of terror at the moment as I look around this room. However, I've been asked again to take us through the operational definition of attachment. The definition that we have generated to inform the work that we do as a multi-agency partnership in North Lanarkshire. What I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to set a little bit of the context, and then I'm going to talk about the definition. And naturally, I'm just going to skim a bit over the definition because this is a very complex subject and we'll be hearing lots more about it as the day goes on. So I'm going to set the context a bit. I'm going to talk about the definition. You'll find the definition in your packs, and it might be helpful as we're going through the presentation for you to refer to the definition. What I'd like to start with is thinking about what is the extent of the challenge that we are facing. You'll be aware of the Growing Up in Scotland study, and these are the findings, the latest findings from this 10-year longitudinal study that's monitoring and tracking the progress of our children. And what this 10-year report is telling us is that there is still a considerable gap in vocabulary at age 5 years, in problem solving at 5 years, between the least deprived and the most deprived in our society. And also importantly, that children in the lowest income group are around twice as likely to present with social, emotional, and behavioural difficulties. And we know that these are all linked, that social, emotional, behavioural difficulties play a huge part in terms of children's progress, success in school. So these are really important findings. The interim report of the National Improvement Framework, which also came out last year, late last year, talked about there being a 14-month gap at age 5 between the least and most deprived in terms of their cognitive ability. Now, if you're 35 or 45 or 55, 14 months isn't that much. If you're 5 years of age, that's really significant. So we certainly have an issue to address. Now, I don't want to imply that this is, that there's a direct and a straight relationship between what we're trying to address in terms of promoting healthy attachment and poverty, because our society abounds with tales of people who have overcome poverty and lived very successful lives. And often what underpins that is a sense of a secure family base that has given them a really good start in life. So these are very complex relationships, but nevertheless, we know that the challenges of poverty can exacerbate the risks, and there are often many associated complex social problems. And this is a quote from Alicia Lieberman, which tries to reflect that. If you're bombarded with poverty and uncertainty and challenges, then it does take a superhuman quality to provide the conditions for secure attachment. Because as Callum has said, parenting is hard. It's hard for most of us, and it presents its challenges to all of us. So I just want to also refer to this study. This is another longitudinal study that's taken place in the United States of America, the ACE study, which looks at adverse childhood experience and looks at the impact of adverse childhood experience on emotional well-being, on children's learning, and indeed on the whole life trajectory. So in terms of people's health outcomes, people's success at work, their employability, these are very significant factors. And what this study found was that if you have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, loss, disruption in your life, traumatic experiences, experience violence, then you're 32 times more likely to have learning and behaviour problems. We know too that within North Lanarkshire we do face certain challenges. And that's why within the Early Years Collaborative we've taken a focus on promoting healthy attachment for all our children, but in the interest of equity, targeting those groups of children and communities where they are most vulnerable and where we really need to target specific support if we're actually going to close that gap and give children the best chance in life. Oh, not working. I have this on my wall. It's a reminder to a psychologist that while theory is important and informs us, we also need to think about how are we actually going to implement and what is it that we need to put in place in order to make sure and realise our aspirations. Yogi Bear apparently was a baseball player and coach. He died recently, aged about 90, but he left us with some interesting, somewhat quirky, but occasionally very wise sayings, and I really like this one. So what I'm going to talk about now is the way in which I think the operational definition can help us to translate attachment theory into practice. And when I listened to Paul, it echoed for me this: what do we do to make it work? Well, we do need a clear purpose, and we've got that. And we need readiness and commitment, and we've certainly got that in abundance. We need a shared understanding and language of what it is that we are working on together. And we need to consistently implement, and we need to be able to evaluate our progress, how are we doing, and then learn, as Callum says, learn from our successes and also learn from our mistakes. So these, I think, are the key elements of what we need to do if we're going to translate theory into practice. So, why an operational definition? Well, an operational definition helps us to do a number of these things because it puts that workable meaning into our everyday terms. It helps us to share and understand language, the language we're using. It provides us with some consistency, some direction and focus if we're working together on using the same definition. And it also means that we can collect data. If you have a definition, you can collect data around that and you can evaluate your progress and learn. This is our operational definition. It is the longest operational definition in history. But I think at this stage in our development, it's necessary for us to have this level of detail. And really, the reason I think that is this is a developmental definition. And so as a multi-agency partnership, I think it can help us to share an understanding, but also to define what role we, in each of our partnerships, what particular role we're playing in promoting attachment. So I'm going to start off by just taking us through the definition. And this is the first part of it. Babies are born utterly helpless. They entirely depend on adults to meet their needs. That journey for independence is a very long, slow one when you compare it with the journey of other species. So they have absolutely no ability to meet their own needs, unlike members of other species. So in order to survive, they need to keep their carers close to them. And this, I'm just going to show you a little video clip which I've shown before, and this is from an old Morse episode. And it really, for me, just sums it up beautifully.
Let's go. I'd sooner listen to Dino's Can Bazooki than this.
Bless us.
I don't know how parents can bear that noise.
You can't. That's what it's for. It forces you to do something.
Wise words. Forces you to do something because otherwise babies wouldn't survive. So the first step in the attachment process is about claiming. And babies need to be claimed by their parents because they are totally dependent. They need to gain control over the carer's responses to them in order to feel safe and in order to survive. They bond. It's a sensory experience at that stage. It's about that sense of being totally focused on a baby's needs. And if you think about what it's like when a new baby comes into a household and the way that everything will revolve around that child and that child's needs. So it's about that absolute preoccupation. And because it's so significant in terms of that first step, then it's really important in terms of the identity that the baby begins to form, that kind of sense that they exist for other people. So if things go wrong and needs for claiming are not met, then children may be unable, in some senses, to form that core identity, to have a sense of who they are. And that in later life can make them very vulnerable, because they may then take on the identity of others and gravitate perhaps to those who are not a good influence for them. But children might also be very puzzled by relationships of any kind, just find it really hard to make sense of relationships. They'll lack a fundamental sense of safety, that the world is a safe place where their needs will be met. And they may be very demanding of attention, or very controlling, very dependent, or very inclined to take risks. So if those fundamental needs are not met, it can have very profound effects. Now, we're not talking about these needs being met all the time. There's no such thing as a perfect parent, and I really need to stress that. It's about what happens most of the time, not about what happens all of the time. Our colleagues in the health service, in midwifery and health visiting play a huge part in supporting parents in those very early stages, before birth, at birth, and in those early days, in terms of claiming. And there's been a lot of work has gone on. There was a lot of work established already, and there's been a lot of work has gone on within the Early Years Collaborative. And I just want to show you one example of this. This was a small test of change that was carried out within NHS Lanarkshire, and it was using hypnobirthing, which my understanding of it is well, as it sounds, it's about preparing for birth and being relaxed and being in tune with your body. And there's been some learning from that I think is going to be adapted, but adopted within our systems. But the reason I want to show you this video was made by one of the mums who took part in the hypnobirthing classes. And really, I think what it speaks to is the importance of that early feeling of connectedness and the importance of birth experience and what that means for families and what that can mean in terms of bonding. And I know that our health colleagues do a lot of work around that, but I'd just like to take some time to let you see this video and hear the experiences of the parents concerned.
At first I didn't want to know anything about the birth. I was so scared of it, and I think within the first session, like, I had no fear whatsoever, and I think by the end of all the sessions I was looking forward to it. Never thought I would be looking forward to the birth at all.
I felt excited about having a birth experience again when even the last one had been so traumatising for me.
And I feel I used the breathing techniques all through my pregnancy, so obviously coming up to finishing up work, there was so much work stuff to get done, and so many times I took 2 minutes out to hypnobirth, breathe, and thought, well, do you know, calm, I'm fine.
It made me sit down and take some relaxation time and some time for myself and time with my husband to do relaxation, and it really strengthened our bond together, and it really gave me chill out time.
I think I'd done the rainbow relaxation every day, which was, it just done it in the afternoon, totally chilled me out. I went to sleep listening to the affirmations as well, so that kept me calm throughout the pregnancy.
My experience of a hypnobirth was feeling almost detached from the event itself. It was as if I was looking at somebody else going through it in a way, because I was so zoned out and so chilled out. As much as there was an element of pain, there was so much element of relaxation in it as well, and I almost felt in my own little bubble.
My waters broke 6 weeks early, but I thought I would have, if I hadn't have done hypnobirthing, I would have totally panicked. But I was just, straight away, I was just like, do my 4/8 breathing all the time, just like that's all was going through my head was just 4/8, 4/8, 4/8, 4/8. And then when we got to the hospital and the contractions started, the surge breathing really helped, and the relaxation CD as well.
My delivery was pretty complicated. My baby was back to back in compound, which means our hand was stuck up at her head and she was blocked from getting out, so it was quite a long and painful delivery. But at no time was I scared or felt out of control.
The hypnobirthing course gave me the confidence to ask the questions like, is my baby in any danger because of this? Am I in any danger? What are the other options other than having some sort of chemical intervention to bring my contractions on stronger? Because I feel like if the contractions were made stronger, I wouldn't have been able to cope.
Never really had a clue before, but then it definitely made us more relaxed and really started to look forward to the birth. Maybe be able to ask questions to see if there was other options. Definitely without the hypnobirthing, we probably wouldn't have been as well informed as how to go about doing the birth the way that we wanted the birth to take place.
I think it cemented the idea that a birth partner has an important role to play, and that it came to me that Victoria would need somebody to talk on her behalf. We were told the advocacy role, that she wouldn't be in a position to say, no, this is not what I want to do, and that really that was our job.
And we sat down and talked about our birth preferences beforehand, so that when it did happen, if Victoria was in sort of deep relaxation or wasn't up for talking, I knew what to tell the midwife.
I didn't panic as much this time round. It was just quite chilled and everything when Sharon's waters broke. I remember the first time really, it was rush, get everything together. I felt this time that it didn't need to be like that. It was natural, and this was just a natural thing. And yeah, we're going to go to the hospital in case there's any complications, I suppose. But I just felt totally calm this time. It just changed my outlook.
After Archie was born, I just actually felt high. I felt like I was just like so overjoyed and so relieved, and just I'd been so tired near the end, but I think all that kind of faded away, and I just felt totally elated and euphoric once I'd actually given birth to my baby boy the way that I wanted.
I feel pleased with my birthing experience and proud of my birthing experience, and I think doing the hypnobirth gave me the confidence to have that enjoyment, which probably if I hadn't done the hypnobirthing, I don't think I would have went down the same road during the birth.
As soon as my baby was born, I think the impact of the classes started to show. She was really chilled out and really calm and content, and I felt I could spend a lot of time with her without her crying or being upset, and I felt like I knew her before she came, because I would speak to her, and during the relaxation I almost felt like she was here already when we were doing practice, so I felt like I had a bond with her as soon as she was delivered, and I put that down to hypnobirthing.
She's quite a chilled out, relaxed baby, and she sleeps really well, so maybe that would be down to the hypnobirthing.
So just an example of how we can make a difference at that very early stage, and it's lovely to hear those parents talk about that connection, what it's meant to them. So just to go on now through the definition, I'm going to talk about the next steps and then say something about some of the work that we're doing within North Lanarkshire. So the next stage in the attachment process is about attunement, and that's about when parents and carers start to tune into each other. So the baby will have a need, the baby will express that need by crying, the parent or carer will act to meet that need. And if that happens in a responsive and consistent way, then the baby begins to trust that their needs will be met and that the world is a safe place. So that's about that, sometimes called the dance of attunement, that kind of rhythm of interaction between babies and carers. And quite often you will see parents, even if they've not got a baby, they're still, you know, doing that kind of rocking thing and that kind of natural rhythm that takes place. But one of the important elements of this is that babies are inevitably going to be subject to stress. I mean, we saw that in the Morse clip, because they can't meet their own needs. And they need to provoke a level of stress in their carers so that their carers will act to meet those needs, and we also saw that in the Morse clip. Babies have absolutely no capacity to regulate their own stress. And so it's that rhythm of attunement, that dance of attunement, if needs are consistently met, that begins to lay down that pattern for the regulation of stress. Now, if that doesn't happen, if the child's needs are not met, or the child is experiencing neglect or a level of abuse, then what happens instead is that there is no capacity to regulate stress, and that stress becomes overwhelming. And we know that stress hormones ultimately impair the ability to retrieve information, they lower the immune system, they make people irritable, very hard to process information. So it has a considerable effect if we are unable to regulate our stress. Children may also be unable to form trusting relationships, because that predictability of having your needs met in a consistent way is what helps to form that sense of a positive working model of the world and a sense of trust. Children who experience unregulated stress may be very, very easily triggered to react. They can also at times, if the stress is really overwhelming, they can dissociate from that stress. And so they can present sometimes as if they're doing okay when actually they're not. And we know there have been some studies that have shown that some children who've had really adverse childhood experiences and who on the surface can appear quite calm, if you actually measure their cortisol levels, their levels of stress hormone, then those can be really, really high. So consistently unmet needs for attunement have profound implications in terms of ability to manage stress. Building on that, physical attunement is affective attunement, and that refers to the social interaction that takes place between babies and carers. Babies are absolutely hungry for faces. You probably saw in that film quite a few instances of babies looking up at their parents. And we know that babies show very strong preferences for faces. Affective attunement refers to that intimate conversation through vocalization, through smiling, gazing at babies. And it's an active process. Babies start to learn that they can make things happen, that if they smile back at you, things will happen, you will respond in a certain way. And some of you might have seen the film of Ethan's first few minutes, in fact, where you see this tiny newborn baby imitating his dad, sticking out his tongue. So babies are active in that. That experience is laying down the patterns for a child's awareness of their own feelings, for their ability to read faces and understand other people, so the foundations of empathy. It's also laying down patterns for social interaction is pleasurable, it's enjoyable, it's something to be sought out. And it's also laying down patterns for an awareness of other people and other people's feelings. If those needs aren't met and the child experiences a lack of responsiveness or hostility on their carer's face, anger at times, or neglect, then they will find it difficult to find that joy in social interaction. They might not be motivated to make progress because you kind of have to have relationships with other people in order to want to make progress. So relationships can be really challenging for those children, and sometimes those children will be stigmatized for their lack of social skill. So you can see as we go through this that when needs are unmet to a significant extent, it has profound implications for development. So just to add to that, because these stages build on each other and they're not discrete, they are interrelated and they do build on each other. I want to say a little bit about the next stage, which is around emotional regulation. And this is what it builds on affective attunement. You've all been there, I'm sure, if your parents, maybe not really with the super glue, but with something pretty similar, the pseudo-cream or the talcum powder or the paints or the crayons. So young children, as they begin to explore their world and get mobile, they want to explore, but they're kind of subject to impulses. They don't really have any way of assessing, is this risky if I put my fingers in the electric shock socket? Or is this socially very unacceptable if I make a tremendous mess? So they really need their carers to keep them safe and to help them to learn what's acceptable and what's not. So the way this usually happens is that a child will be about to embark on something, will maybe turn to check with their parent or carer, what do you think? This is a good idea? And if the child sees disapproval on the carer's face, that's a misattunement and provokes a feeling of momentary shame, which causes distress and can have the effect of stopping the child. And if that situation is handled in a positive way, where the carer reintegrates the shame by comforting or distracting, then that's a really healthy pattern, because it produces a pattern of being able to regulate your shame, but also a pattern for, do you know, if I make a mistake and I get this wrong, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. And eventually that leads to a capacity to stop and think. However, if the shame is not handled in that way and the child meets with hostility, or there are a lot of shame-inducing experiences over normal, typical behaviours, exploratory behaviours, or sometimes it's okay and other times it's not, so it's really unpredictable, then that produces a pattern where it's difficult for the child to take responsibility or to learn from their mistakes or to make choices, because if you make choices, you have to be able to predict whether or not you're going to regret something later. And if your experience of shame has been really inconsistent, then it's not possible to do that. So they don't talk about toxic shame for nothing. Although Dan Hughes would tell us that that shame, that reintegrative shame, is really important in terms, because it's necessary for the development of guilt. And guilt is what we feel in relation to other people, and is what can stop us hurting other people. So it's part of that whole kind of moral development and development of social responsibility. Infants are also subject to rage, as many of you will know, anyone who's had to deal with a screaming child in a supermarket. Well, what happens around that rage is that when there's that level of attunement, the attuned carer will contain that rage and help the child to manage that rage. And that, if that's repeated as a consistent pattern, then that's building the patterns for managing aggression and destructiveness and managing anger. If those needs are not met, however, it can set up difficulties for the child in managing aggression and in managing destructiveness. And so again, has profound implications. So really, as a combination of those, when needs for regulation of impulse, shame and rage are not met, then children can have an inability to manage their destructive impulses or to account for events. So lying is sometimes shame-based behaviour, for example. Sometimes very ordinary events will provoke unmanageable rage, which leaves everybody wondering what was the trigger to that. And when a child or a young person is easily triggered, then they can also become the fall guy, the person that is set up to fire the bullets. And what always strikes me about these two pictures is they're very similar expressions there. But I think the response that they call out from us is very different. So the baby will be calling out feelings of sympathy, empathy, but perhaps not the adolescent young man who is full of his own rage. So that's a quick overview of our operational definition and the developmental steps of attachment. But how are we making that real? How are we translating that into practice in North Lanarkshire? Well, I think we're doing that, as we said. We've got a clear purpose and we've got a definition and we've got a model. And we're also using evidence-based approaches. and gathering that data to learn about how effective are these approaches in helping us to reach the goals that we've set for ourselves. So I'm going to say a little bit about each of these approaches and say something about the way I think they are working together. You may well be familiar with 5 to Thrive. One of the things that we recognised was that we had to find a way of working with, sharing with parents some of the theoretical ideas that we had. And we've been using 5 to Thrive within North Lanarkshire. 5 to Thrive is based on the work of Cairns. And these are lovely, kind of accessible materials which provide a really nice framework for parents' responsiveness to their children. Kind of based on the 5 a day idea, that with these 5 elements, we can promote effective, positive attachment relationships. So there was a small test of change took place in Craigneuk. I'm just going to show you a little, very short clip of some people talking about that experience. But since that time, 5 to Thrive has been rolled out across North Lanarkshire to support our parents and family relationships. And Alison Hayes is leading that work, and I think you'll be able, on the walk-around workshops, you should be able to see more detail about that. So just a head teacher and a nurse, an early years practitioner, talking about their work in the very early stages of this.
Having the joint training in 5 to Thrive has helped all services and partner agencies develop a shared understanding on how to help children in the Craigneuk area reach their developmental milestones before starting school. The approach helps us to work with vulnerable families in a very simple way.
Working with one family, we used the 5 to Thrive building blocks. What we aimed to achieve was giving the parents a better understanding of if we're able to respond to our children, we're more relaxed, and if we're more relaxed, we give more cuddles. If we give more cuddles, we're more active in play, and if we're more active in play, we're able to talk better with our children. So that was our aims. So through the support of the nursery, what we did was give the parents some take-home bags, little wish bags, and set them some wee tasks to do. And the parents thoroughly enjoyed this. What we found was the family were more interactive with their children.
Okay, so just a little bit about 5 to Thrive. So what else are we doing in terms of supporting attuned interaction? I'm going to say a little bit about these 3 approaches, and I think they have a number of things in common. They're asset and strengths-based approaches, which are, they have a good evidence base, they're respectful, they're about working collaboratively with our families, and they focus on promoting attuned and positive interactions. I think what's important about this is that we are working extensively to develop a skilled and knowledgeable workforce. And our view is that relationships are the key to this. We're working with relationships. It's relationships that we're trying to support. So we need to have the capacity ourselves to build good relationships with our service users. But that's not necessarily straightforward, and it takes training, and it takes time, and it takes opportunities for reflection, and it needs support. So relationships, it's an easy thing to say, but it can sometimes be a hard thing to do. These are some of the comments that we've had from parents about the approaches that we are using. So I've already spoken about 5 to Thrive. If I say a little bit about the other approaches, Lorraine has already said that we are using Solihull and that we are offering that training has been offered. Many have already been trained. And what Solihull does, I think, is that it builds on our understanding of attachment and of the importance of attachment in terms of children's brain development. But it takes that knowledge and understanding and helps people to think about how can they relate in a helpful, reciprocal way that supports parents to find their own solutions and develop their own relationships. And again, you'll get a chance to hear much more about Solihull during the course of the day. But we know that this is making a difference to the way that the workforce is thinking about how to work with families and with children, and is having a considerable impact, as you can see here, without the understanding. And it's about that understanding. It's about having that understanding and developing the skill, but the understanding is key to it. I would not have been able to offer the kind of support that I had. So Solihull is kind of the foundation of everything that we're doing here. In terms of developing the workforce, we're also using video interaction guidance. Now, video interaction guidance is an evidence-based approach which uses small video clips of interaction, focusing on positive interactions which help people to identify their strengths and build on those strengths. And it's a highly effective therapeutic technique that has gains fairly quickly, often very quickly. So that sits kind of at that stage where families are needing some therapeutic intervention and support in order to develop their relationships. And VIG is very effective within there, as you can see. It's also been used with very vulnerable families and with some success. Video-enhanced reflective practice is a derivative of VIG. So it's based on the same principles, but its purpose really is to skill up the workforce in terms of attuned interaction. And so I think it really potentially can support the Solihull approach. We have found that it's very effective in terms of helping people to think about how am I actually relating, how am I actually interacting in order to be most effective. So these are the approaches that we're using, very much based on similar principles, and I think sit together very well. So this is obviously not about taking packages off the shelf. This is about having a coherent approach based on our understanding of attachment and what we're trying to achieve in promoting the well-being and fostering good outcomes for all our children, but also for those most vulnerable. So as I've said, it's about relationships. Relationships are key. Really important, easy to say, but we do need to work on it. We need to change the way we do relationships, and I think that we're beginning to do that, because we know if we get alongside people and support people in a meaningful way, then they are much more likely to be empowered to find their own solutions. So just a bit of a summing up about what the science tells us about early relationships and that permanent effect on brain development, later mental health, and outcomes. That the importance of responsive caregiving and promoting responsive caregiving to mediate some of the challenges that we face. And about social and emotional development, and remember we saw right at the start about issues around social and emotional development is strongly linked to success in school and beyond. Because what I think we have to remember is that ability to self-regulate, to plan and to organise is what makes us effective workers and contributors to society as well. And those foundations are laid in the very, very early stages. but we also need to remember when things have gone wrong, it's possible to intervene effectively and help children and adults to recover. So I'm going to turn to my man Yogi Bear again, because I think it's important that we do know where we're going. We do have a vision, and that vision is about supporting all our families to achieve healthy, positive relationships and outcomes. It's about having a skilled workforce, really skilled workforce, to deliver those outcomes, to support families. And it's about effectively intervening in a skilled and evidence-based way when things have gone wrong. So we do know where we're going, and I think we're certainly making progress towards reaching our goals. Now, I had hoped to show you maybe some clips from Verb and Vig, just to kind of illustrate some of the points around attuned interaction. But unfortunately, the sound quality was not great for an audience of this size. So what I've done instead is, I was at a conference last week and I saw this clip, and I really liked it, so I shamelessly stole it. Or as they say in the improvement methodology, I lovingly lifted it. So some of you may have already seen it. It brings a whole new meaning to the term attuned interaction, as you will see. But actually, you will see some attuned interaction and reciprocity. This is a clip of a little Brazilian boy playing guitar with his dad. And there's a message in the song as well, or at least in the song title. Let's not let them down, thank you.